Leonard Turner had never expected much from life. His days were carved into the soil of his modest farm on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a small town tucked deep in the American Midwest. Seasons had shaped him the way they shaped the land. Dry summers that cracked the earth, brutal winters that gnawed at his bones, and the rare mild spring that offered him enough hope to keep sowing seeds again. His farmhouse leaned like an old man too tired to stand straight. The barn's roof sagged under the weight of years without proper repair. Leonard patched things with scraps, just as he patched his life with prayers and grit. Some days he wondered how he hadn't already lost it all. His debts were high, his harvests meager, and his hands so calloused they seemed made of the very ground he tilled. That morning had begun like any other, until the letter arrived. The envelope was heavy, the paper thick. Unlike the bills and notices that usually darkened his mailbox, his name was written in precise black ink, Mr. Leonard Turner. No one addressed him like that. Most of Willow Creek called him Lenny, if they bothered calling him anything at all. He slit it open with a knife and read slowly, his lips moving over each word. You are hereby informed of the inheritance left to you by your late relative, Agnes Miller. Leonard froze. Agnes Miller? He racked his memory. The name was nothing more than a faint whisper, maybe something his mother had mentioned when he was a boy, some distant cousin or aunt, too far to matter. Yet here her name was, carrying a weight he could feel pressing down on him. The letter explained. Agnes had owned property on the edge of town, an abandoned building, once an orphanage, shuttered decades ago. And by the law of succession, strange, twisted law that worked in mysterious ways, Leonard was the sole heir. He read the final line twice, hardly believing it. The deed shall pass fully into your possession upon your formal acceptance. The orphanage stood at the far side of Willow Creek, past the mill and overgrown fields where no one bothered to tread anymore. By the time Leonard arrived that evening, the sun was sinking low, spilling long shadows across the cracked road. His old pickup rattled like bones as he pulled to a stop in front of the gates. The place looked forgotten by time. Tall iron bars framed the entrance, rusted and split in places. Weeds twisted through them as if trying to drag the whole fence back into the earth. Beyond lay a building of pale stone, its windows dark and hollow, like eyes that had witnessed too much. Leonard felt a chill, though the air was warm. The orphanage had been closed long before he was born, yet the stories lingered. Children who once played in the yard, cries echoing through the halls, and the silence that followed when the doors were finally shut. He stepped forward. The lock on the gate had already rusted away, hanging uselessly. The creak of metal groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and rot. Floorboards groaned beneath his boots as he crossed the threshold. Broken furniture lay scattered, as if the building had been abandoned in haste. On the walls, faded murals showed smiling children holding hands beneath painted skies. The colors had bled away, leaving ghostly outlines. Leonard swallowed hard. The place unsettled him, but there was something else too, a pull, as though this inheritance carried more than bricks and land. For the next few days, Leonard tried to make sense of the property. The deed confirmed his ownership. The lawyer who delivered the paperwork assured him it was legitimate, but Leonard couldn't shake the feeling that the orphanage hid secrets. On the third day, while exploring the east wing, he noticed something odd. A section of floor near the wall sounded hollow when he stepped on it. Kneeling down, he pried away a loose board. Beneath, darkness yawned. A narrow stairwell descended into the earth. His breath caught. He hadn't expected this. No one had mentioned cellars or basements. With a lantern in hand, he descended slowly, the wooden steps creaking under his weight. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth. The lantern light flickered across stone walls. Shelves lined the corridor, filled with old crates, rotting papers, and forgotten belongings. But at the far end lay something stranger, a heavy steel door, its surface rusted but intact. Leonard reached out and touched it. The metal was cold, even here underground. Faded letters were carved into the doorframe. Property of Willow Creek Orphanage. Restricted. Why would an orphanage need such a door? He tried the handle. It resisted at first, then gave way with a groan. Beyond, the tunnel opened into a chamber larger than he had imagined. Wooden supports braced the walls, but what caught his eye was the glimmer at the far end. A rock face split open, and in the cracks, something shone faintly in the lantern's glow. Minerals, veins of them running through the stone. Leonard stared, breathless. He didn't know much about geology, but he knew enough to recognize the raw shimmer of wealth buried in the earth. This wasn't just an orphanage. This was land worth something, maybe worth everything. But word travels fast in small towns. By the time Leonard returned to his farm that night, another man already knew of his inheritance. Charles Dawson. The name carried weight in Willow Creek. A wealthy landowner, part-time politician, and full-time manipulator, Dawson had built his empire not by planting fields but by swallowing them whole. He owned half the town already, and the other half feared him. When Dawson arrived at Leonard's door 2 days later, he wore his usual smile, polished, sharp, and false. "Mr. Turner," Dawson said, tipping his hat. "I hear congratulations are in order. Quite a windfall you've stumbled into." Leonard's gut twisted. He hadn't told anyone about the minerals. Not a soul. Dawson's eyes lingered, cold despite the warmth in his voice. "A property like that can be a heavy burden, you know. Abandoned places come with complications. Maintenance, taxes, unwanted attention. I'd be happy to take it off your hands. For a fair price, of course." Leonard swallowed. His mind flashed to the shining veins in the rock, the steel door, the hidden chamber. He knew then that Dawson knew something, and if Dawson wanted it, it meant Leonard had inherited far more than he realized. Leonard Turner had never been a man of suspicion. His life until now had been too full of labor, too heavy with debt, for him to waste time thinking about secrets and schemes. But ever since he set foot in that orphanage, something had shifted. The way Charles Dawson appeared at his door so quickly, it gnawed at him. Dawson wasn't a man who moved without purpose. The offer Dawson laid out sounded almost rehearsed. He spoke of complications, responsibility, and legal risks, sprinkling the words like crumbs meant to lead Leonard into a trap. He even produced a folded contract from his jacket pocket, already prepared, as though he had known exactly what Leonard would say. "I'm offering you more than the place is worth," Dawson said, sliding the paper across Leonard's rough kitchen table. "Sign this, and you'll walk away with enough to square your debts and start fresh. No more worries." The figure written on the page was large enough to make Leonard's heart quicken. To a man living off beans and worn-out boots, it was a fortune. But compared to what he had glimpsed beneath the orphanage, the glitter of hidden veins in the stone, it felt small, too small. Leonard set the paper aside. "I'll need time to think." Dawson's smile faltered for the briefest moment, then reassembled itself. "Of course, take your time. But I must warn you, properties like that tend to complicate quickly. Think wisely, Mr. Turner." With that, Dawson rose, tipped his hat, and left. That night Leonard couldn't sleep. The words "complicate quickly" rolled in his head like thunderclouds. He pulled out the deed papers again, running his calloused fingers over the legal script. Something bothered him. The document Agnes Miller had left bore her signature, but Leonard realized he had never seen her name connected to the orphanage in town records. The building had always been spoken of as a town property, not privately owned. How had she come to hold the deed? The next morning, he carried the papers into Willow Creek's small public library. The building was old, 2 floors with shelves that smelled of dust and cedar. Behind the desk sat Rebecca Harper, the town's unofficial historian, a woman with sharp eyes and a patient manner. "Leonard Turner," she said, adjusting her glasses. "You don't come in here often." He handed her the documents. "Could you look at these? I inherited the orphanage, but something feels off." Rebecca studied the papers, her brow furrowing. She pulled several thick volumes from the archive section, laying them on the oak table. Hours passed as she compared old maps, property transfers, and census records. Finally, she looked up. "Strange," she murmured. "The orphanage closed in 1968. According to these records, the land was purchased from the county in 1972 by Agnes Miller herself." Leonard frowned. "But Agnes never lived here. Why would she buy it?" Rebecca shook her head. "And here's another oddity. The sale price listed was unusually low, almost symbolic, as if the county wanted it out of their hands quickly." Her voice lowered. "And Leonard, I don't think you're the only one interested in these records. Charles Dawson requested these same files last week." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. So Dawson had been sniffing around even before Leonard received the letter. That evening, Leonard returned to the orphanage with a growing unease. He brought tools this time: a stronger lantern, a crowbar, and a notebook. He descended into the hidden cellar again, his boots echoing against stone steps. The steel door groaned open. He walked into the chamber, his lantern catching on the glitter in the rock face. He knelt closer. running his fingers across the stone. The veins weren't just shimmer, they were deposits. Metallic, dense, maybe silver, maybe something else. He wasn't sure. On the shelves along the wall, he discovered more than crates. There were ledgers, sealed in wax paper, still legible despite the years. He flipped through one, his heart pounding. Pages detailed shipments of supplies to the orphanage, food, clothing, medicine, but they also mentioned extractions from the lower chambers, small amounts carefully recorded, as if someone had been mining quietly even while children lived above. Leonard slammed the ledger shut. The thought sickened him. Children playing above ground while beneath, someone dug greedily into the earth. As he stood, a sound echoed through the chamber. A footstep. Leonard spun around, lantern raised. A shadow moved in the stairwell. "Who's there?" he called, his voice rough with fear. No answer. Only the sound of retreating steps, quick and hurried, vanishing into the darkness above. By the time Leonard reached the surface, the intruder was gone. But outside, he spotted fresh tire tracks in the dirt road leading away from the orphanage. Someone had been watching him. The following day brought another encounter, this one less shadowed, but no less threatening. As Leonard loaded hay onto his truck in town, Dawson approached again. He leaned casually against the truck bed, his polished boots gleaming. "Busy, man," Dawson said smoothly. "I trust you've considered my offer." Leonard wiped the sweat from his brow. "Not interested." Dawson's smile thinned. "You're making a mistake. That place is more trouble than you can handle. Old buildings collapse, Mr. Turner. Accidents happen. Would be a shame if the burden of upkeep swallowed you alive." The words chilled Leonard more than the autumn wind. Dawson wasn't offering anymore, he was warning. Leonard forced his voice steady. "I'll manage." Dawson's eyes hardened. For a moment, the mask of politeness dropped, revealing the steel beneath. Then, just as quickly, he tipped his hat and walked away. That night, Leonard sat at his kitchen table, the ledger open before him, Dawson's threat echoing in his ears. He realized he was standing at the edge of something larger than himself. If Dawson knew about the minerals, and he surely did, then Leonard's inheritance was more than just land. It was a battlefield, and Leonard Turner, poor farmer with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn grit, had just become its unwilling soldier. The days that followed felt heavy with invisible weight. Leonard Turner tried to work his farm as usual, but every plow of the soil, every bleating of his few goats, reminded him of the hidden veins beneath the orphanage. His hands labored on one patch of earth while his mind lingered in another. The orphanage called to him. It was more than a curiosity now. It was a responsibility, perhaps even a danger. He had inherited more than rotting walls and broken furniture. He had inherited secrets that powerful men wanted to claim. On the third morning after Dawson's thinly veiled threat, Leonard loaded his truck with supplies: rope, lanterns, gloves, a pickaxe, and a stack of canvas sacks. He told no one where he was going. The less people knew, the better. By the time he reached the orphanage, the morning fog still clung to the grass. The building loomed against a pale sky, its windows staring like blind eyes. Leonard pushed through the iron gates and slipped inside, determined to probe deeper into the mysteries below. The cellar was colder than before. His lantern cast long shadows across the stone walls, illuminating the steel door and the chamber beyond. Leonard knelt again by the rock face, chipping gently with his pickaxe. When a sliver of mineral fell into his palm, it gleamed like captured starlight. Silver. He was sure of it now. He rubbed it between his fingers, awed by its weight. This wasn't just a trace, there was depth here, richness that could change a man's life. He gathered a few samples into a sack and set them aside. But it wasn't the silver alone that stirred him. It was the ledger, the mention of extractions, and the unanswered question of who had mined here before. Leonard carried the ledger to a wooden table and flipped through its brittle pages. Names appeared in careful script: foremen, suppliers, even children assigned to chores. He paused when he found an entry dated 1957, 3 units removed from the lower vein, witnessed by CD. Leonard's breath caught. The initials burned into his thoughts. CD. Could it have been Charles Dawson's father? The Dawson family had lived in Willow Creek for generations. If they had known about the silver even then, the feud was older than Leonard realized. The more he read, the more he understood. The orphanage hadn't merely been a place for children. It had been a cover. The laughter of orphans above had masked the quiet mining operation below. While he examined the shelves, Leonard noticed something odd. a stack of crates shoved awkwardly into the corner. He pried one open with his crowbar. Inside, beneath rotting cloth, lay stacks of folders sealed in wax. Breaking one open, he found blueprints, detailed maps of the orphanage and the tunnels below. Some showed expansions never completed. Others revealed shafts leading deeper into the bedrock. One map bore an official seal, County Surveyor's Office, 1971. Scribbled across it in faint pencil were the words, "Keep hidden." Leonard felt his pulse quicken. These weren't just idle records. They were proof that officials, maybe even politicians, had been complicit. Hours passed as he sifted through documents. He didn't hear the first creak upstairs, nor the shuffle of feet across dusty floorboards. It wasn't until the lantern flickered that he sensed he wasn't alone. He froze, listening. A faint whisper drifted down the stairwell. A man's voice. Then another. Leonard extinguished his lantern in a hurry. Darkness swallowed him whole. His heart thudded so loudly he feared it would give him away. Slowly he reached for the pickaxe, gripping it tight. The voices grew louder, descending the steps. A beam of flashlight pierced the chamber. Two silhouettes entered. Men in work boots, broad-shouldered, their faces half hidden. Hired hands, no doubt sent by Dawson. "Boss says check the crates," one muttered. Leonard's grip tightened. If they found him here, he was finished. He slid silently along the wall, inching toward a narrow gap between shelves. The men pried open a crate, cursing when they found only decayed fabric. "Must be deeper in. Let's grab a few ledgers. Show the boss." Leonard knew he couldn't let Dawson get the records. He reached for a loose stone on the shelf and tossed it across the chamber. It clattered against the far wall. "What was that?" one hissed. Both men swung their flashlights toward the sound and moved in that direction. Leonard seized his chance. He darted up the stairwell, boots thudding against the steps, lungs burning. "Hey!" one of them shouted. Leonard burst through the orphanage's main hall, sprinted through the broken doors, and stumbled into the open yard. He didn't stop until he reached his truck, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life just as the men appeared in the doorway, their flashlights cutting through the dusk. Gravel spat from his tires as he tore down the road. His hands shook, sweat running down his neck. He had escaped, but not for long. Dawson would know someone had been in the chamber, and Dawson would guess who. Back at his farmhouse, Leonard hid the ledger and blueprints beneath a loose floorboard. Then he sat at the table, head in his hands. He needed help. Someone with knowledge of history and law. Someone who could interpret these documents and expose Dawson before it was too late. The answer came to him quickly. Rebecca Harper. When Leonard showed her the ledger and blueprints the next morning, Rebecca's eyes widened. "This is incredible," she whispered. "Not just the silver. These records prove the county was involved in something illegal. The orphanage was a front, and if Dawson's family was part of it..." She trailed off, her gaze hardening. "He'll stop at nothing to bury this." Leonard nodded grimly. "He already sent men after me. Nearly caught me down there." Rebecca set the papers aside. "Then we need a record outside of Willow Creek. Someone Dawson can't intimidate. I know a journalist, Clara Jean Sullivan. She's written about corruption in the county before. If anyone can help, it's her." Leonard hesitated. Trusting outsiders wasn't in his nature, but Rebecca's eyes held conviction. "Do it," he said. That evening, Clara Jean Sullivan drove in from the neighboring city. She was younger than Leonard expected, with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority. She listened as Leonard recounted everything: the inheritance, the tunnels, the ledgers, the men in the chamber. When she examined the documents, her face hardened. "This is dynamite. If I can cross-reference these with county records, Dawson's finished." Leonard exhaled, relief flickering through him. But Clara's next words brought the tension roaring back. "Which means," she said, "he'll be more dangerous than ever. Men like Dawson don't lose quietly." That night, Leonard couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on him. As he sat on his porch, the sound of an engine drifted on the wind. Headlights appeared on the distant road, paused near his farmhouse, then drove on. A warning, perhaps, or a promise. Leonard clenched his fists. He was no longer just a poor farmer. He was the inheritor of secrets that could topple a dynasty of greed. And as the crickets sang and the night pressed close, he knew this was only the beginning. The next week turned into a slow grind of tension. Leonard Turner could feel the change in Willow Creek as clearly as he felt the weather shift in the fields. Whispers followed him whenever he walked down Main Street. The butcher paused mid-cut when Leonard entered his shop. The clerk at the hardware store avoided his gaze. It was as though invisible ink had been written across his back. Troublemaker, marked man. Charles Dawson had started his work. The first blow came in the form of a letter, delivered by certified mail. It bore the seal of a prestigious law firm from the capital city. Inside, Leonard read accusations that the orphanage property did not, in fact, belong to him. The letter claimed the deed Agnes Miller left behind was legally deficient, and that Dawson held superior claim through an older family trust. Leonard crushed the paper in his hand, heart hammering. He had the original deed. Rebecca had checked the county records. Dawson's trust was a fabrication, but lies written in the language of law looked as sharp as truth, and Dawson knew it. The second strike was more subtle. Farmers who had once nodded to Leonard on Sunday mornings now turned their shoulders. A rumor spread that Leonard intended to sell the orphanage to an out-of-state mining company, bringing noise and pollution into Willow Creek. Dawson's voice was behind it, smooth, convincing, poisonous. By the third blow, Leonard could hardly stand it. A county inspector appeared at his farm, clipboard in hand, declaring half his equipment unsafe and threatening fines. The man muttered apologies under his breath, clearly ashamed, but it didn't matter. Dawson's reach extended into every office, every pocket. One evening, Rebecca Harper arrived at Leonard's farmhouse, her face grave. "He's moving fast," she said, laying a stack of newspaper clippings on the table. Each headline cast Leonard in a darker light. Local farmer hoards abandoned property. Turner's orphanage could spell trouble for Willow Creek. Silver rumors stir greed. Leonard read them in silence, jaw tight. "He's trying to turn the town against you before the truth comes out," Rebecca said. "Clara's digging, but Dawson has years of allies, years of money. We'll need undeniable evidence if we want to expose him." Leonard pulled the ledger from beneath the floorboard. "We've got this. We've got the blueprints, too." Rebecca nodded. "Yes, but the people won't believe unless they see it for themselves, and Dawson will try to destroy these before that ever happens." That night, Leonard dreamed of the orphanage again. Children's voices echoed faintly through the halls, laughter blending with the ring of pickaxes against stone. He saw shadows moving underground, men with Dawson's eyes, their hands grasping silver like it was their birthright. He woke with sweat on his brow and the certainty that Dawson would strike harder soon. The strike came the following day. Leonard returned from the fields to find his farmhouse door ajar. Inside, the floorboards had been torn up. The ledger was gone. He staggered back, fury and dread crashing together. Dawson's men had been here. They had stolen the most damning evidence. By nightfall, Clara Jean Sullivan arrived at the farm, her car tires spitting gravel. She stormed inside, notebook in hand. "Dawson filed a petition today," she said, slamming papers on the table. "He's claiming the orphanage is condemned and must be demolished for safety. If he gets approval, the building and everything inside will be gone within weeks." Leonard's stomach dropped. The hidden chamber, the blueprints, the silver veins, it would all be buried forever. Clara's eyes burned. "We need more proof, something they can't deny." "You said there were deeper tunnels? Maps of expansions? If we can photograph them, document the silver, and publish it before Dawson acts, his entire scheme collapses." Leonard swallowed. Returning to the orphanage now meant danger. Dawson's men had been inside already. But what choice did he have? 2 nights later, under cover of darkness, Leonard, Rebecca, and Clara returned to the orphanage. The moon cast silver light across the stone facade, eerie and pale. Leonard carried his lantern and pickaxe. Clara had a camera slung around her neck. Rebecca clutched the blueprints tightly. The air inside was thick with dust. Their footsteps echoed in the hollow halls. Leonard led them down into the cellar, through the steel door, into the chamber. Clara gasped when her lantern beam hit the glittering rock. "Good God," she whispered, raising her camera. The flash burst in the darkness, capturing proof in white light. This alone could buy the county 10 times over. Rebecca examined the crates. "Look," she said, pulling free a bundle of letters sealed with the county's insignia. More evidence. Transactions, supply orders, contracts. They worked quickly, documenting everything. But as Clara bent to photograph the ledgers, a sound drifted down the stairwell. Voices. Leonard's blood ran cold. He knew that tone, rough, commanding, sharp with authority. Charles Dawson himself. The footsteps grew louder. Dawson's voice carried down the stone steps. "Check everything. If Turner's been sniffing around, I want it sealed off. Tonight." Leonard grabbed Clara's arm. "Hide the camera." She slipped it beneath her coat, heart racing. Rebecca tucked the blueprints into her satchel. Leonard lifted his pickaxe, sweat slicking his palms. The shadows of men stretched across the chamber walls as Dawson descended. His figure appeared in the lamplight, tall, broad-shouldered, his polished boots spotless even in the dust. His eyes landed on Leonard, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Well," Dawson drawled, "I was hoping we'd meet down here." His men fanned out behind him, 3 of them each carrying heavy flashlights like clubs. "This land doesn't belong to you, Turner," Dawson said. "It never did. My family built this town, carved it from nothing. That silver is ours." Leonard's chest heaved. "Your family hid behind orphans and lies. You don't own this, and you never will." Dawson's smile thinned. Brave words from a man who doesn't understand how the world works. The law bends for those who can afford to shape it. Men like me. He leaned closer, his voice a hiss. "And men like you? You're ground beneath the heel." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber. Only the drip of water from the stone ceiling punctuated it. Then Leonard lifted his chin. "Not this time." Dawson's eyes flickered, surprised by the defiance. He straightened, gesturing sharply to his men. "Seal it. Burn it if you have to. I don't want a trace left behind." Rebecca gasped. Clara tightened her grip on Leonard's arm. Leonard raised his pickaxe, ready to fight if he had to. But even as the tension boiled, Clara's voice cut through. "You destroy this place, and I'll have the story printed across the state by morning. I already have photos, documents, evidence. The world will know exactly what you're trying to hide." Dawson's face darkened, rage sparking in his eyes. He lunged forward, but one of his men pulled him back. "Boss," the man whispered urgently. "She's serious. Cameras. Journalists. If this gets out..." For a heartbeat, Dawson froze. Then, with a snarl, he turned on his heel. "We'll see who the law believes, Miss Sullivan. I'll bury you all before this is done." He stormed up the stairs, his men following. Their footsteps echoed until the chamber fell silent again. Leonard let out a shaky breath. Rebecca leaned against the wall, trembling. Clara's hands shook as she clutched the camera to her chest. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Leonard felt the tide might be shifting. The following morning, Clara Jean Sullivan drove straight to the neighboring city. She hadn't slept, her mind alive with the images captured on her camera. Each photograph was a weapon sharper than any blade. By noon, she had developed them, copies tucked safely in multiple envelopes. One she kept, one she mailed to her editor, and another she sent directly to the State Bureau of Land and Mineral Resources. Leonard and Rebecca waited anxiously at the farm, watching dust swirl in the fields as if the earth itself anticipated the storm. By evening, Clara returned, her eyes alight. "They're sending investigators," she said, dropping her bag on the table. "Not just from the Bureau. I spoke to a contact in the Attorney General's office. They've been circling Dawson for years but never had enough evidence. What we found at the orphanage might be the crack they've been waiting for." Leonard blinked, hardly daring to believe. "So someone finally listens." Clara smiled faintly. "They'll listen now." 2 days later, 2 black sedans rolled into Willow Creek, their tires crunching on gravel. Out stepped state officials in dark suits, accompanied by geologists carrying heavy equipment. They didn't announce themselves with pomp, but their presence rippled through the town like lightning. People whispered on porches. Shopkeepers leaned out of doorways. Leonard met them at the orphanage gates. The lead investigator, Mr. Franklin, shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Turner, Miss Sullivan has briefed us. We'll need access to the property." Leonard nodded and led them inside. The officials moved with brisk efficiency, photographing, cataloging, measuring. The geologists chipped samples from the chamber walls, nodding knowingly at the silver veins. Others examined the ledgers and blueprints, their brows furrowing as the scope of corruption unfolded. "This is extensive," Franklin muttered. "If the county knowingly hid mineral rights under the guise of an orphanage, it's a violation of both state and federal law. And if Dawson's family profited," he shook his head, "it could bring down more than one man." Rebecca stood nearby, her arms crossed, watching with quiet satisfaction. For decades she had studied Willow Creek's history. Now the truth was finally surfacing, piece by piece. But Charles Dawson did not retreat. That same afternoon he strode into town hall with his lawyers in tow. He emerged an hour later with a smug grin and a folded court order in his hand. By sunset, a sheriff's deputy arrived at Leonard's farm. The man was red-faced, clearly uncomfortable as he read the notice aloud. Dawson had filed for injunction against Leonard, claiming Leonard had trespassed on restricted property and tampered with county records. Until the matter was resolved, Leonard was barred from entering the orphanage. Leonard's fist clenched. "It's mine. The deed is in my name." The deputy shrugged helplessly. "I don't like it either, Lenny, but Dawson's pulling strings. Best you let the lawyers handle it." When the deputy left, Leonard slammed the paper onto the table. "He's choking me with his money. If he can't scare me, he'll drown me in lawsuits." Clara leaned forward. "Then we fight him in daylight. He thrives in shadows, rumors, bribes, backroom deals. But if the evidence goes public, he loses control." Rebecca nodded firmly. "The people need to see who he really is." The following Sunday, the town gathered at the church for service, as they always did. Leonard attended, though he felt every eye burning into him. Afterward, Clara stepped onto the steps of the church with Leonard and Rebecca at her side. "People of Willow Creek," she called, her voice ringing across the courtyard. "You've been told lies. Mr. Dawson says Leonard Turner is a thief, a trespasser, a greedy man. But I've seen the truth with my own eyes." She raised the photographs high. Faces leaned forward. Gasps rippled as she held up image after image. The silver veins, the blueprints stamped with county seals, the ledgers naming officials complicit in theft. Rebecca's voice followed, clear and steady. "For generations, the Dawsons used this orphanage as a front. Children lived above while silver was stolen below. And now Charles Dawson seeks to erase the evidence and claim the land as his own. Ask yourselves, who profits from silence?" Murmurs grew into shouts. For the first time, suspicion shifted away from Leonard and onto Dawson. The man himself stood across the street, his face dark as a thundercloud. For once, his polished smile failed him. That evening, federal agents arrived with a warrant. Leonard watched from his porch as their vehicles rumbled toward the orphanage. Flashlights cut through the dark. Documents and crates were loaded into vans. The site was officially under investigation. When the lead agent returned, he handed Leonard a paper. "Mr. Turner, until further notice, this property is secured under state authority. But rest assured, your claim as heir remains valid. Dawson can't touch it now." Leonard exhaled slowly, relief mingling with exhaustion. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. For once, Dawson was on the defensive. That night, Leonard, Rebecca, and Clara sat at his kitchen table. The lantern light flickered, casting long shadows. For the first time in weeks, Leonard allowed himself a faint smile. "Maybe there's a chance," he said softly. "There's more than a chance," Clara replied, tapping her notebook. "There's a story that's going to bring Dawson to his knees." Rebecca raised her teacup. "To justice, then." Leonard lifted his glass of water, his hands still rough and calloused, but steadier now than they had been in a long time. "To justice. The investigation should have ended everything. Federal agents had the ledgers, photographs, and blueprints. The town had seen proof with their own eyes. Leonard Turner should have been safe, but Charles Dawson wasn't a man who accepted defeat. For days, Willow Creek buzzed with rumors. Some claimed Dawson had fled to the capital to rally his political allies. Others whispered he had burned evidence hidden in his mansion outside town. Leonard didn't trust any of it. He knew Dawson too well. A man like that didn't run, not until the last card had been played. On a cold October evening, Leonard learned just how far Dawson was willing to go. Leonard was mending a fence on his farm when a pickup roared down the dirt road. It stopped in a spray of gravel. Rebecca Harper stumbled out, her face pale. "Leonard," she gasped. "Clara, she's gone. They took her." Leonard dropped his hammer, his blood running cold. "What do you mean?" "She went to photograph Dawson's property. I told her it was too dangerous, but she wouldn't listen. She hasn't come back. I found her car abandoned near the orphanage." The world tilted around Leonard. Dawson had made his move. Rebecca grabbed his arm. "He'll kill her if we don't act." Leonard's jaw set. For weeks he'd endured threats, lies, and sabotage. But this was different. Dawson had crossed into open violence. "We're ending this tonight," Leonard said. They armed themselves with what they had: lanterns, ropes, Leonard's pickaxe, and Rebecca's old hunting rifle. The sun dipped low as they drove toward the orphanage. Shadows stretched across the land, long and skeletal. The iron gate stood ajar, creaking in the wind. Leonard's boots crunched over gravel as he led the way inside. The orphanage loomed above them, its hollow windows glowing faintly with light from within. Dawson was waiting. They heard Clara before they saw her. Her voice echoed faintly through the halls, defiant, even in fear. "You think you can silence me?" "The story's already out, Dawson. People know." Her words were followed by a sharp crack. Dawson's hand across her face. Leonard's vision went red. He surged forward, Rebecca close behind. They followed the sound down into the cellar, past the steel door, into the chamber where it had all begun. Lanterns glowed along the walls. Dawson stood at the center, flanked by two of his men. Clara was bound to a chair, her lip bloodied but her eyes blazing. Dawson turned as Leonard entered. His smile was back, cruel and triumphant. Well, well, the pauper himself. Come to witness the end? Leonard gripped his pickaxe. This ends tonight, Dawson. One way or another. Dawson laughed, the sound echoing off stone. You think the law will save you? The law bends to those who own it, and I own this town. He gestured to the glittering wall behind him. This silver is mine by right. My family built their legacy on it, and I'll be damned if I let some dirt farmer steal it from me. Rebecca raised her rifle, her voice steady. It was never yours. You stole it from children, from the county, from everyone who trusted you. Dawson sneered. Spare me the moral sermon. History remembers the winners, not the orphans. One of Dawson's men lunged forward. Leonard swung his pickaxe in a wide arc, the steel clanging against the man's flashlight and sending sparks into the dark. Rebecca fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the crack deafening in the chamber. Dust rained down. Clara shouted, Leonard, behind you! Leonard spun just as the second man charged. They collided, crashing against crates. Leonard fought with every ounce of strength, his calloused hands grappling for control. The man slammed a fist into his ribs, but Leonard drove his knee upward, breaking free. Rebecca fired again, and the bullet chipped stone inches from Dawson's head. The land baron snarled, dragging Clara's chair forward as a shield. Drop it or she dies, Dawson barked. For a heartbeat, silence. Leonard's chest heaved, sweat pouring down his brow. Then Clara spat blood onto the ground and hissed, Don't you dare, Leonard, end this. Rage surged through Leonard. He raised the pickaxe high and brought it down, not on Dawson, but on the crate beside him. The wood splintered, scattering documents across the floor. Ledgers, contracts, proof of Dawson's crimes. The sight distracted him for just a second too long. Leonard lunged. The two men crashed together, grappling in the dust. Dawson was strong for his age, fueled by fury and desperation. But Leonard had the strength of years spent breaking soil and carrying burdens heavier than his own hope. He wrenched Dawson's arm, slamming him against the rock wall. The impact sent a tremor through the chamber. Cracks spread across the stone. A low rumble echoed as if the earth itself had chosen its side. Get out! Rebecca screamed. The chamber shook. Dust fell in choking clouds. One of Dawson's men fled up the stairwell, abandoning his boss. The other lay unconscious. Leonard shoved Dawson to the ground. This is over! But Dawson, wild-eyed, scrambled for a fallen pistol. He raised it, aiming square at Leonard's chest. Time slowed. Leonard saw the barrel gleam in the lantern light. He heard Clara's gasp, Rebecca's cry. Then the ceiling gave way. A massive slab of stone crashed down between them, splitting the floor. The pistol clattered into the rubble. Dawson fell back, pinned by debris, his cries echoing through the chamber. Leonard rushed to Clara, cutting her bonds. Rebecca helped her to her feet. Together they stumbled toward the stairwell, coughing in the dust. Behind them, Dawson's voice howled in rage and fear. You can't bury me! Do you hear me? I own this town! But his words were drowned by the roar of collapsing stone. They emerged into the night, gasping for clean air as the orphanage shuddered behind them. The old building groaned like a dying beast, its windows glowing with dust and firelight. Then with a final crash, the roof caved in. The orphanage was swallowed by its own secrets. Leonard stood in the yard, staring at the ruins. Rebecca clutched the blueprints to her chest. Clara leaned against him, bloodied but unbroken. It was over. The following days blurred into motion. Federal agents secured the site, digging through rubble to recover crates of documents. Dawson was dragged out alive but broken, his body pinned by stone, his power shattered. He was taken into custody, charges piling high as the evidence mounted. For Leonard, the nightmare had ended, but something new was beginning. The trial of Charles Dawson became the most talked about event in Willow Creek's history. For weeks, headlines across the state carried his name. Local power broker indicted on fraud, corruption, and conspiracy charges. Photographs of the once untouchable land baron now showed a man pale and gaunt, shackled at the wrists, his arrogant smile replaced by a hollow stare. Leonard Turner sat quietly in the courthouse, Rebecca Harper and Clara Jean Sullivan on either side of him. He wore his one good jacket, borrowed years ago for his sister's wedding and never used since. His rough hands felt strange, folded neatly in his lap. When Dawson entered the courtroom, a murmur rippled through the spectators. He still carried himself with a semblance of pride, but his limp from the collapse and the bruises on his face told a different story. Judge Raymond Holt presided, his stern gaze sweeping the room. He was known for his fairness, a man who could not be bought. Leonard felt a spark of hope as Holt called the proceedings to order. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. Ledgers proving illegal mining beneath the orphanage. Blueprints stamped with county seals, marked keep hidden. Letters linking Dawson to bribed officials. And Clara's photographs, clear images of the silver veins, the crates, the chamber where Dawson had once stood and declared himself the town's owner. Witnesses testified. Rebecca recounted her discovery of the documents. Clara told of her abduction and Dawson's threats. Even the deputy who once delivered Dawson's injunction admitted under oath that he had been pressured by Dawson's men. At last, Leonard himself was called. He walked to the stand, heart pounding. "Mr. Turner," the prosecutor asked, "tell us in your own words what you found at the orphanage." Leonard cleared his throat. His voice was rough, unpolished but steady. He spoke of the inheritance, the hidden stairwell, the chamber beneath. He described the silver veins glinting in his lantern's glow, the ledgers that told a story of decades of theft. The night Dawson tried to silence him with lies, then violence. Finally, he looked across the courtroom, meeting Dawson's gaze. "I may be a poor farmer," Leonard said softly, "but I know right from wrong. That land was meant to shelter children, not line the pockets of men already rich." Dawson thought no one would stand against him, but this time he was wrong. The room was silent when he stepped down. After days of testimony, Judge Holt delivered his ruling. His gavel struck like thunder. "Charles Dawson, this court finds you guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful exploitation of county property. You are hereby sentenced to 30 years in state prison." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Dawson's face twisted, rage flashing in his eyes. He struggled to rise, shouting, "This isn't over! That silver is mine! You can't take it from me!" But bailiffs restrained him, dragging him from the courtroom. His cries echoed down the hall, fading into nothing. For the first time in decades, Willow Creek was free of his shadow. In the weeks that followed, life began to change for Leonard Turner. The state recognized his rightful inheritance. With the orphanage property secured, Leonard received legal ownership not only of the land but also of the mineral rights beneath it. Mining companies, legitimate and regulated, approached with offers. Leonard didn't rush. Guided by Rebecca and Clara, he negotiated carefully, ensuring the contracts favored the town as well as himself. Within months, controlled excavation began, not hidden in darkness, but open, lawful, and beneficial. Jobs returned to Willow Creek. Families who had once feared Dawson now looked to Leonard with respect. He poured part of his new fortune into rebuilding the orphanage grounds, not as a mining site, but as a memorial garden for the children who had once lived there. A plaque was placed at the gate, in memory of those who were silenced and in honor of truth brought to light. One crisp morning, Clara visited the farm, now transformed. The sagging barn had been repaired, painted bright red. The farmhouse stood tall, its porch freshly rebuilt. Leonard himself looked changed, his clothes newer, his shoulders straighter, though his hands were still the hands of a farmer. "You've done well, Leonard," Clara said, smiling. He shrugged, though pride shone in his eyes. "Couldn't have done it without you." Rebecca joined them, carrying a stack of history books. "We've preserved every record. Willow Creek's story won't be buried again." Clara laughed softly. "And the world knows Dawson's name for what it truly was: greed and corruption. Justice made him small." Leonard gazed across his fields, where sunlight spilled like gold over the earth. "I spent my life thinking I'd never be more than poor. But wealth doesn't just mean silver. It means freedom. It means no one like Dawson can ever put me, or this town, under their thumb again." Epilogue. Years later, Willow Creek thrived. The mining slowed, then ceased. Once the richest veins were responsibly harvested, what remained was not greed but growth. New schools, new businesses, families who stayed instead of drifting away. At the center of it all stood Leonard Turner, no longer the poor farmer but a respected landowner, philanthropist, and guardian of the town's memory. On quiet evenings, He walked the garden built on the orphanage grounds. Children now played there, their laughter echoing against the memorial stones. Leonard often paused beneath the plaque, tracing its letters with his calloused fingers. He remembered the darkness of the tunnels, the rage in Dawson's eyes, the moment the earth itself seemed to decide who would win, and he felt a deep, unshakable truth. Justice had prevailed, and so had he.